from Taipei. Now we move on to our next news. The European Commission has said that a negotiated trade solution with the United States is within reach, while EU members voted to approve counter-tariffs on 93 billion euros of US goods in case the talks collapse. The 27-nation bloc's executive has repeatedly said its primary focus is on reaching a deal to avert 30% US tariffs that US President Donald Trump has said he will apply on August 1st. Alongside negotiations, the Commission has expressed on with plans for potential countermeasures, merging two packages of proposed tariffs of 21 billion euros and 72 billion euros into a single list and submitting this to EU members for approval. Some reports suggest that the rate would be up to 30%, designed to mirror US tariffs. Now we are joined by Peter Cardillo. He's a chief market economist at Spartan Capital Securities. Thank you for joining us, Peter. Good to see you. Now, how realistic is the European Commission's goal of reaching trade resolution, given that only few days are left for the deadline?
Well, yeah, the deadline is getting closer, and of course, there seems to be movement with the EU, and so I think that we're probably going to get some sort of a compromise. But of course, President Trump has made it quite clear that tariffs will begin at 15% and above. I don't expect the EU to be paying much above 15% if they pay 15%. So, it's still a pretty hefty tariff imposition, and it means that at least for now here in the States, corporate America seems to be absorbing the tariffs, but I don't think that that's going to be long lasting. And so no matter how you spin this, the bottom line is that anything north of 10% will eventually show up and inflation will heat up. So it's just a question of time. And
Yes.
With India, it seems as though India is not too much concerned about the deadline, but here again, we expect some sort of a compromise, even though perhaps India seems to be unfazed by the deadline. Now, with regards to China, Secretary Benson made it quite clear that the deadline is likely to be extended. Obviously, that's a very complicated situation. So you might have a deadline that's extended for China, but for the other nations, I think that deadline sticks, and it becomes somewhat of a pressing matter to come to some sort of resolution.
Yes, we are hoping so, but it seems like India and US talks are now stalled. Well, we go back to our topic. How can the EU balance its efforts to negotiate a deal with its readiness to implement countermeasures without escalating the current situation?
Well, I think, the president of India seems to have a fairly good relationship with Trump. And so I think, he'll probably justify it. But again, I think as we get closer, some sort of deal will be struck. And that deal may not be as favorable as perhaps the United States would like, but I think a deal will be struck. So it's just a question of time.
And now, Peter, with the EU preparing counter-tariffs, how do you assess the likelihood of a full trade war between the US and EU?
Well, I've said this before, and I'm not going to change my thinking. Like I said, I expect the deadline to be respected and that there will be some sort of a compromise. But if it is extended, or if not necessarily extended, but if India does not um, come up with a trade deal before
Yes.
August 1st, and much higher tariffs are imposed on the Indian nation, it's obvious that it's not going to last. So I think the psychological factor behind the deadline is to make other nations aware that, uh, let's say, 30 or 40% tariffs can be imposed on a nation if if they go beyond the deadline. But that doesn't mean that they're going to stay there. So it's just a question of, again, you might miss the deadline and you go a week or 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, but not much more than that. No one could stand 30 or 40% tariffs. It would just, you know, would just
Yes.
create a situation where the economies would just back down. And I don't think that that's the case. And certainly I don't think that's the uh, willingness on the part of the United States. If that was the case, who would we trade with?
Yes. And Peter, now how is this news being covered in U.S. where you are?
Can you repeat that, please?
Yes. So I asked, how is this news of EU thinking about or have decided already on the countermeasures being viewed in the in U.S. media? How is this news covered there?
Well, I think, both nations are prepared, and like I said before, I expect some sort of an agreement. And so I think that that's not the problem. I think there's plan A, there's plan B. Certainly, I don't think it gets to plan C. So it might get to plan B, but here in the States and in India as well, I think that, that plan B would be the final plan that would strike some sort of a deal.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter Cordillo, for joining us as always and sharing your insight as a chief market economist at